So, this incident happened to me last October. It was 10 a.m. on a weekday and I had the day off, so I decided to go to the grocery store and get some pumpkins to carve in preparation for Halloween. I did my shopping with no problems. I didn't notice anything off since it was earlier in the day and the other shoppers were elderly. I bought 3 large pumpkins and had them in a cart to put in the trunk of my car. As I was putting the first pumpkin in my trunk, holding it with one arm, opening the trunk with the other and my back to the parking lot, I feel someone pulling the pumpkin out of my arm backwards. I spun around and threw that pumpkin in the process to see 2 men directly behind me. I am a very small female, so I immediately felt really endangered. The one man who I assumed was the man who first grabbed at me made an attempt to scream at me in a language that I didn't understand and grab at me again. I pushed the cart with the remaining pumpkins at the 2 men and got in my car to lock the doors and drive away. The 2 men got into a white, brand new Dodge Charger with 10 plates and sped out of the parking lot after me. The street we both pulled out on was a busy 4-lane, 25-mile-per-hour business district. You can't safely speed there at all. But that didn't matter to the Dodge Charger, who weaved in and out of traffic to try and run me off the road. The driving was so erratic that another driver attempted to box the Charger in fact. It didn't matter much though. They went into oncoming traffic anyway. Meanwhile, I threw my left turn signal on and made a quick right into a coffee and donut chain I regularly frequent. Next to this coffee chain is a pizza chain. It wasn't open yet. I noticed that the Charger had pulled into this pizza chain and was waiting for me to pull out of the coffee chain parking lot. I frantically told an employee what the hell was going on through the drive-thru while I ordered a snack. What I mean is that I was there and I didn't want to pull out. This coffee chain knows me well, and on this day, the manager went above and beyond the call of duty. She called the police, who told her to have me pull around to the window. I did this knowing that I would be in full view of the Charger, so she came outside, standing between us with the biggest rolling pin I've ever seen in my life. She stared these men down like my own mother would have. The cops came and they took statements eventually, and the Charger was still there, so they searched it. One officer told me that apparently they pulled tarp and rope from the trunk and are treating this as a possible trafficking attempt. Both men were eventually found and they refused to answer any questions and were charged for something. I don't know for sure what their intent was, but I live in a sanctuary city with mostly people from Nepal or Bhutan and have never had a scary issue like this before. I love my neighborhood, and I didn't recognize these men or their car frequenting the neighborhood ever. That day, I bought everyone working at that coffee chain a gift certificate for a massage as a thank you for protecting me, and I still tip them every morning extra a year later. At one of the lowest points in my life, I ended up in a psychiatric facility for 2 weeks. It doesn't sound that long, I know, but when you've got nothing to do in a small building, all and every day, it feels like months. You really get to know people in there in a short amount of time. Some kind people, and some that I wish I'd never met. I was with an abusive guy at the time, but that's another story. My teacher had discovered my plans for necking myself, and I was Baker acted. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically where you can call and report if someone seems unstable or wanting to harm themselves, and they take you to a facility for up to 3 days if they believe you may have a mental illness. At 9 in the morning, I was questioned by the police. I was taken to the hospital after for a general exam. It was 3 p.m. by the time that I was taken to the facility. The building, it didn't look like much from the front. I remember walking in and being escorted through a series of long hallways. and eventually I was placed in a waiting room with several other people, just barely enough seats for everyone. I took the only open seat beside an old man who promptly started touching himself under his blanket. I just leaned really far over to the wall and didn't look at him, trying to ignore him. Thankfully, he was soon called out after, and one by one, the people in the room were escorted out. I was the last one there, and it was now night. They turned the lights off in the waiting room, and I got a little worried. I just sat there like, of course they forgot about me. I'm that unimportant. But there was no supervisors around or anything. But there was a camera. Eventually, someone leaving to lock up saw me in there, and they got me squared away. Halfway through the process, I heard angry screaming and saw orderlies running toward it. They tackled a patient and took him out of the main floor. Soon, I was strip searched and I was given temporary clothes and a room in the women's ward. It was 11 p.m. when they released me into the main facility. I remember wondering how I never noticed how big this place was from the outside. It was lights out at 10 p.m., but one of the doctors gave me a plate of food since I hadn't eaten that day. Immediately, I was greeted by another patient, an elderly black lady who was sweet. She told me that she was pregnant and was eating for two, and asked for my pudding. I chuckled, assuming she was joking, and I did. But as she spoke, I realized that she wasn't joking. She actually thought that she was pregnant, and her husband was coming to get her soon. She was kind of sad, but harmless. The first night, I didn't sleep a wink. There was another woman in my room, and she had to be on 24-hour watch. The first few days were really surreal. Wake up at 7 a.m., take vitals, and medicate. Afternoon, vitals, and medicate. Night, vitals, and medicate. There was nothing to do there, all day, every day. In the adults facility, the women's ward was on the left, and the men's on the right. Patients were allowed to intermix during the day, except for rowdy or dangerous patients. They were not allowed to interact or were in the quiet rooms. Quiet rooms were 2 rooms between the wards that had windows on the doors, and they were soundproof. Some particularly bad patients were strapped down and sedated in there. I'd already made friends with some of the patients at this point. In the ward, we all exchanged phone numbers as a gesture of friendliness. It was understood that nobody actually keeps them after they get out. It was just a basic way of conveying, you aren't my enemy. And believe me, there were plenty of cliques and groups and drama and factions in there. I tried to be cool with everybody though, and so most of the patients and staff liked me. And that's when I met Alphonse. Alf was a big, burly guy with a lot of anger issues. Now, I've always favoured the underdogs, and so I made friends with him. We exchanged numbers to show that we were cool with each other. But after that, things got a bit strange. I learned that he was the one that the staff tackled my first night. He would commonly yell and throw things at the staff. The furniture in the ward was blocky kid furniture that was filled with sand. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that they were hard to push around. But Alf once picked up a sand-filled chair and threw it at one of the orderlies, missing and slamming against the wall. He was very, very strong. Eventually, the doctors convinced me to sign a voluntary admittance since my Baker Act was up. They said that I was ready to go home. Honestly, I felt I wasn't either. Though the ward had its issues, I'd have rather been there than been with my abuser at the time. So I stayed, and it sucked too since it was over Christmas. But I'm getting off track. Alf, who proclaimed to be homosexual, started magnetizing to me. It was clear that I was his only friend in there, and he started questioning what it would be like to be with a woman, and that I could be his first. Obviously, I was not interested at all, and I was loyal to my current relationship. His advances, though, they didn't stop. He would talk to me about running away together, living together, and trying to get me in the bathroom with him daily. It was so bad that it started getting to the point where it began freaking me out. He started getting angry when I talked to other people in the ward. One day, I was playing cards with some nice people in there that I became pretty close friends with in a short time. Alf came over and looked right at me and said,
"You're a fucking traitor, bitch,"
and proceeded to kick our table over with massive force. Like, this damn table went flying. He stared at me too, but the orderlies were quick to grab him. I was protected in there, and he was in isolation for a couple of days after that. Once he got out, he seemed genuinely sorry and asked me to forgive him. I said sure, because what's the harm, right? Better not to have a massive angry enemy in a small space, right? His sister even called and thanked me for being his friend, because he never really had any. And it did seem good for a while. There were no issues after that. But his sexual advances started again. Some sounded like hints or threats too, and he started to get angry when I would refuse him. But the day finally came and I was finally cleared for release again. Out of the ward and finally home, I didn't really look back. But the calls started coming in. It was Alf, using his phone time to call me. At first, I thought that he'd forget about it in a couple of weeks, without being there or talking much. But he did not. Alf called for about 2 months until I finally just stopped answering. And then I got a call from an unknown number one day. It was him. He was released from the ward. He would call me from different numbers, pressuring to find me and start a life with me, as he called it. By this point, I was pretty much petrified of him. I told my parents and boss in case he ever found me or showed up at my work. I never went to the police though, because technically nothing had happened, so there wasn't anything that they could do. He'd become irate and scream on the phone though, and make inappropriate comments a lot, but nothing physical. It's not like he knew where I was too. So one day, not too long after all this, I accidentally destroyed my phone and was without it for about a year. Once I had gotten a new one, I tried to forget about all of this. I never thought that he would be back, especially because it would mean calling a dead line for so long. But right after I got a new phone, the same number, calls immediately started again from Alf. Like he was just calling every single day and waiting. Like nothing had changed for him. And the comments, the anger, the wanting to run away together, all of it continued, and I was getting spooked again. Finally, the last time he called, he informed me that he was in state. That is, the state mental hospital, generally the next step from the ward I was in. My phone was soon deactivated after that, and I haven't had a phone since, about 3 years now. I got a Google Voice number and never heard from him again, but I'm afraid that we might run into each other again someday. I met many people in the ward, some far gone and some just down on their luck. There were a lot of humbling experiences and good people there, but Alf was the only one that really scared me. Though he never got the chance to hurt me, I always wondered what he could have done. His temper was so unpredictable and nasty, and he was such a big guy. I'm just really glad that he never found me outside of the ward. But now that I know that he's in my state, he could be released, even right now.